Hey, welcome everyone to Icon. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone's doing well. We are glad you guys are here with us this morning. And we've got kind of a few announcements for everyone, and then we're going to jump into some worship. And we're going to do another live message today, so we're going to come back with that in just a moment. But first, let's go through some of the announcements. Kel, do you want to let them know what's going on?
Yeah, first of all, if you are new to Icon, since we've been meeting online, we would love to connect with you. Just disregard the barking dog in the background.
Stupid dog.
She's the worst. But if you're new around here, which, we've had a lot of new people actually. So, and if you haven't had a chance to click on that connect button yet, we'd love for you to do that. It takes you to a spot where you can fill out your info so that we can stay connected with you. That way, as things are changing or if there's anything going on that we would like for you to know about, you'll get notified of that. And one really easy way is just to download the Icon app, because then you can set up notifications and get notified of anything that's going on.
Your face is kind of in the app, Kel. Just hiding behind the app. Yeah, we want to let you know. Also, you're so strange. Also, anytime during service, if you would like someone to be praying with you, there's a button that you can click on to ask for prayer. And what that'll do is that'll open up a private chat with someone from our staff or someone from our prayer team that you can kind of tell them what you need prayer about. Please be praying for our community in general. Also, I got a text this morning from Jonathan and Christina. Jonathan went in for gallbladder surgery, kind of emergency surgery, was having some pain. So be praying for them. I think he might be there.
I think he's currently
right
in surgery.
now. Yeah. So just be praying for them. So if you'd like prayer, you can always click on that button and request prayer. Lastly, I just want to thank all of you that continue to give here to Icon Church. Thank you so much for your generosity that allows us to continue to do this. If you want to give, you can always do that by clicking the button there in the chat, or through the app, or through Icon Church online, or iconchurch.com/give. So many URLs, and since this quarantine, everything happens online. So thank you so much for that. So what we're going to be doing today, like I said, is we're going to transition in just a moment to some worship. This week, I was pretty stoked when I was editing this week. It's Benji and Arlene at the same time, yet in different places. So I was pretty stoked about that. So we're just,
look how fancy we are.
Look at us. We are fancy. So anyway, we've got some worship, and then we're going to come back live. So I want to encourage you guys to be active in the chat. Because we're going to be asking some questions. We'd love to hear your feedbacks, hear what you're thinking. And then at the end of service today, we're going to be taking communion together. So if you didn't swing by the church to pick up some communion elements, you can use whatever. Kelly, set up communion elements.
We have mango juice today.
We have
that's what we had on hand.
Shot glass of mango juice. So whatever you have on hand, you can use that to participate with us. So at the end, we'll be taking communion. So just a reminder for that. But other than that, we're going to go ahead and transition into some worship, and we'll see you back here afterwards.
I see your face in every sunrise. The colors of the morning are inside your eyes. The world awakens in the light of the day. I look up to the sky and say, you're beautiful. I see your power in the moonlit night, where planets are in motion and galaxies are bright. We are amazed in the light of the stars. It's all proclaiming who you are. You're beautiful. Now you are seated on your heavenly throne. Soon we will be coming home. You're beautiful. You're When we arrive at eternity's shore, and death is just a memory, and tears are no more, we'll enter in as the wedding bells ring. Your bride will come together, and we'll say, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. When we arrive at eternity's shore, and death is just a memory, tears are no more, we'll enter in as the wedding bells ring. Your bride will come together, and we'll sing. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to that. we will sing your song forever.
We worship you, Lord. Yes, we do. God, we just thank you for this time of worship, and for this time that you allowed us to just sing praise to your name, God. And we ask that you may just continue to bless the rest of the service, God. We love you. We thank you. Amen.
Thank you so much, Benji and Arlene. I loved having both
that
of
was so
them
great.
on there. Yeah,
So great.
yeah. And like we said, we are just going to do this message kind of live. We're just going to do this discussion style. So I hope you are able to be engaged there in the chat. One thing we want to give you a heads up on is we've got a little bit of a sick kid today.
Yeah, well, she's got real bad swimmer's ear, so is in a lot of pain. So she's still sleeping, but could come in at any moment. So just be prepared for a crying child.
That's right. Crying child or random dogs walking in the background. Welcome to Icon,
Nothing
everybody.
new.
We've got sick children and dogs walking around. Well, hey, we are going to continue the series that we've been doing called Bless This Mess. And what we've been talking about over the past few weeks is relationships, family. In week one, we kind of talked about some of the foundations of relationships, and then last week we talked about more kind of romantic relationships, marriage, relationships in general. And then this week we're gonna take a concept a little bit of a different direction and talk about what it means to kind of create family, because there are times in our life where we need that, where we need to create family wherever we find ourselves. And sometimes that can happen because we move away from family. Maybe you've lost some family members, or maybe there's some unhealthy relationships and you need to kind of create some family. Or maybe you had family, maybe not even a literal sense, but kind of had your people. Then you lost belonging for whatever reason. You lost that. There was a falling out, and you find yourself wondering, what does this look like? You know, someone commented on YouTube just last week on the public comments and talked about how they feel like they'd lost some belonging with their family. They had kind of lost their people, you know, and were looking for that. And man, I know what that's like. You know what I mean? I've we've been through that when we've moved away. I feel like we've spent probably more of our lives away from our families, our parents, than close to them. You know, so there's been different ways where we've encountered this. Is there anything kind of jump out at you when you kind of hear that you think of maybe as it pertains to your life, how this has kind of intersected you?
Yeah, I mean, I the first thing I think about is just how, we can talk in the church about the importance of family relationships, but the reality is there are so many people that are facing whether it's like an abusive or unhealthy relationship within family members, or and so I think sometimes we can alienate people really easily by not really addressing that, and I 100%, it's like, does God restore and redeem? Yes. However, I don't think that means that we push people to stay engaged in relationships that are harmful to them, and so I think that's the first thing I was thinking about, was how important it is to talk about this idea of creating family. I know that no one can ever replace like a parent or I know that can't be replaced, but I think that we can find ways, and throughout our life together as a couple, and as we've built a family, we've lived far away from our close family for a very long time, and I think that because of that, we weren't replacing those relationships, but we needed to find people where we were that we could create that kind of sense of family with. And I feel like we've been fortunate enough to be able to find people that we can do that with. Yeah,
I feel like the different places we've landed, whether it's Rockford or Austin or here, we've been pretty fortunate to have relationships that we're close to. And I think
we just take them with us.
That's right.
That's what we've learned to do, is then when we move to a new place, we're like, hey,
just bring your friends with you.
us.
That's the trick.
That's what we've done.
Yeah, that's the key. So, but it's not a cult. But you just have to come with us when we go.
Trust us. It's not a cult.
But I think one way that I've thought about this a lot recently is as Icon over this past year has transitioned to be a fully inclusive church for the LGBTQ community, is how much that's happened to them,
Oh,
to the
man.
LGBTQ community.
I can't even like talk about it, or I get super emotional. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's so real.
I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
There's so many people have literally lost family relationships, literally lost best friends.
I read stories we're still getting messages from people
regularly.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
are walking through that right now.
Yeah.
And that's so hard.
So it's vital to talk about what it looks like to create family. What does that mean? What does that look like? And no, like Kelly said, you can never fully replace it. So
Right.
there's always going to be that void. There will always be that pain.
Right.
And I've talked to other people that just we're so polarized in our culture right now. Even differing of opinions on things can cause there to be a loss of relationship.
Yeah.
In various ways, we've experienced this just moving to becoming an inclusive, just expanding our theology, denominational friends, pastor friends, mentors. There's been loss of relationship there, and that's something that you have to process through and look
Sure.
at what does it look like to kind of create family in the midst of that. And I think regardless of where you go next with what, I think to acknowledge the fact that it's hard.
Yeah.
And if you've been through this process or are going through this process, man, that is so challenging and it's painful, and take your time with that process. That's okay. What we're going to do, what we're going to focus on to kind of talk about this is a story and the Hebrew texts in the Old Testament. And it's a small book that happens right towards the beginning called Ruth. And as I was kind of preparing my thoughts for this, I really thought, man, we need to do an entire series on this because in these
So much.
4 short chapters, there's like so much that happens, and there's so much going on like just beneath the surface, like if you spend a little bit of time with it. And I love it because it's this powerful story completely driven by women in this like ancient
Yeah, I love
culture that is predominantly a completely patriarchal culture. And many times people can look at maybe the Bible and say, man, there's so many things in it that seem so backwards, and they're so, and there are some things that seem that way because it was written thousands of years ago by people living in a different time and a different culture. But mixed into all of that, there's also these like subversive stories that completely go against the grain of that day. And Ruth is one of those stories. And we're going to do something towards the end that I think in evangelical culture we don't do enough, but it was commonplace in the early church, was expected. If you were a Jewish person, there's this term called midrash, and what midrash is it's there's places where the scripture's kind of silent, where maybe it's unclear, or there are times that Jesus even kind of takes one meaning and kind of turns it on its head a little bit. And doing that, the more you're willing to, and the more you do dance with that scripture and interact and ask questions and place yourself in it, is like the more faithful you're being to the text. And the Jewish people would do this all the time. The Hebrew people, they would argue and fight, and the whole point was that journey.
Right.
There's this story of these rabbis that are arguing about what a passage means, and the story goes that God shows up and says, I can tell you what this means. And they tell God, what do you mean? Tell us what it means. Get out of here. We don't want to know the meaning. Now, the point of the story being, it's in that journey. So we're going to kind of ask some questions. There's a place in Ruth where we don't have the answers. We don't know what's going on. There's this mystery in that. And we're going to discuss a little bit of that. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and jump into the story. So I'd encourage you, if you have a Bible near you, get it out. If you have a phone near you, you have a Bible near you. So go ahead and go to Ruth chapter 1. It's just 4 chapters. I'm going to read just kind of a few verses. We'll kind of discuss some things, and then I've got some questions. So in chat, be sure to engage. And Kelly, keep an eye on that. If there's anything that you see, kind of point that out. So we're going to start with Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. It says this: In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. And again, just in that brief sentence, there's like so many layers of things going on. First of all, it sets it up in the context in the days when the judges ruled. This was a time in Israel's history where it was just constant cycles of violence, of oppression, and God hearing the cry of the oppressed and sending a judge from the nation of Israel and redeeming them and rescuing them, and just kind of back and forth. So it's in this time, in this context where everything is uncertain, where there's regular hardship, where the people of God, there's sometimes a judge that will rise up. And that's the context in which this happens. So imagine a world where nothing is sure for sure. There's lots of division. Just hypothetically speaking.
Use your wildest imagination.
Provision for so many is non-existent. And then we find out that there's a famine, that something has struck the land that is creating even more loss for the people there. So just there's some things going on in the context there. And it says, so this man from Bethlehem, and Bethlehem means the house of bread. So it's this house of provision. And we discover what's happening in this town of Bethlehem is there's a famine. So in the house of bread, there's no more bread. And they travel to the country of Moab. And Moab is like, they're the enemies. They're the people of God. They're the worst of the worst. In other places, it says that the Moabites are known for their child sacrifices. So some of the worst things you can imagine. So plug in whatever you would there, whoever your enemies would be, these people have to flee for their lives and go there. And we read in verse 2, it says, the man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of their two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem of Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. And again, there's some things going on even here in the meanings of some of these names. So Elimelech means that God is my king. So it sets up that this guy whose name means God is my king, God is my provider. Several times the name of God used in this, there's different kind of Hebrew words, as El Shaddai, which speaks of provision. It actually points to some feminine aspects of God. It's the God that provides. In some of the Hebrew translations, it actually means the breasted God.
Well, there you go.
So there you have that, meaning this provision. So God is the king in that land and living in the house of bread. And then they have to leave all that's foreign, go to these foreign countries where there's these foreign gods, and they have to flee all that's known. Now I want to read verses, I think this is 3 through 5, and then we'll get to some of the crux of what's going on here. It says, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died when they're in this foreign land. And she left her two sons, and they married a Moabite women, the two sons did. One named Orpah, who actually, there's a famous person who was named after Orpah, but they misspelled it on the birth certificate and now goes by Oprah. So if you didn't know that. The other one named Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. Now again, this is happening in this patriarchal culture, which the one thing that can protect you is your family tribe. It's your people are kind of who protects you. And for women, many times this is their husbands, this is their sons. It's a culture that if the husband died, the sons provide. And there's actually all these things kind of set up to help protect women in Israel. But we've got now Naomi is living in this foreign land, completely unprotected. She has these two daughters-in-law, one named Naomi, one named Ruth, and their husbands died. And I love from this point on, the entire story is driven, especially chapter 2, by women. The men are in like 5 sentences completely taken out of the story. Even how they introduce the names Mahlon and Chilion. I can't remember. One of those names means sickness, and one means like infirmed or something like that. So it's in a sense saying like all of these people failed, and now like all the men of the story are incapable of providing deliverance, and the story revolves around these women. So here's Naomi. She has nothing in this culture that she knows no one. It's completely foreign, and she's got nothing. And the next thing we discover is that the famine in Israel ends, and she can go back, and Naomi decides to return back. So she looks at her two daughters-in-law and tells them, hey, you're young, you can still find two husbands. They push back and say, no, we want to stay with you. there's kind of this funny line in there where Naomi's like, listen, I'm too old to have kids. Even if I had a child, are you saying you'd wait around till he's old enough to marry? Like,
Yeah.
no, like you've got nothing here. Like, I can't give you anything. Eventually, Orpah decides to stay. But finally, Ruth refuses, and she has this line. And this is what we want to focus on. It says, but Ruth replied, this is verse 16, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you will go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And what's so intriguing here is why on earth would Ruth make this decision to make Naomi her family? It's like saying, no, I'm going to leave everything I know. I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to leave my people. I'm going to leave my gods and make my family with your clan, with your tribe, with your family. And she goes back with Naomi to Israel. And I think so many of the questions here are, why? Why would Ruth do this? Maybe Ruth had nothing left in Moab. And this is kind of where that midrash happens, where you start asking yourself, what's going on here? Have you ever found yourself in a place where you feel like you've got nothing to go back to? Maybe Ruth felt a closer connection to this person who had been a stranger than she felt to her own family. Yeah. Like, there's been times that you just feel this connection with someone. Maybe Ruth had been rejected by her family for marrying a foreigner. Maybe that decision to marry this foreign person, maybe her family was like, we don't do that here, you know? And she felt rejection there. So maybe that severed it. Maybe Ruth's going, I got nothing else. You know what I mean? If you don't reject me, at least I have that. Maybe she'd begun to understand God a little bit differently. You know, she and Moab, they had an understanding of their national gods, maybe being a part of Naomi's family. Maybe she started to imagine God differently, and that created some separation. Maybe Ruth couldn't even explain it. Maybe Ruth just felt compelled, just drawn to take this step. I know there's been times in our lives that we couldn't explain it. When we decided to move down here to Texas to start a church, there's a lot of reasons why it didn't make sense. I know I had family members that were like, at the time, there were some health concerns with some of our kids. We had great insurance. We were at a great job. We had good pay. Had none of those things in Texas. Didn't know anyone in Texas. Had
you
all
said
these.
Good pay. I'm like, I mean,
that's right. Well, relatively speaking,
it was a steady income.
That's right. Hey, much better than what we had moving to Texas. I'll put it that way. But there's all these reasons, and I couldn't even explain it. It was just this. I just felt compelled. And there's going to be times in your life that you experience these different things. So I'm so curious how we've experienced that. So are there any of those questions, Kel, that kind of jumps out at you as you're hearing this story, that you're thinking what's going on in Ruth's life, or maybe something that you've experienced that relates to that?
And then anybody else too, if you have
feel
any
free
thoughts,
to jump
I'd love
on
to
and
hear,
comment.
Kind of what you're thinking. I mean, I love the story of Ruth. I always have. And I think, like, as you were, kind of suggesting these different questions of, like, because we don't know. I mean, there's so much. One of the beautiful things about Scripture is that it is open for us to explore and to, it doesn't always say exactly what's going on. It gives us room to kind of imagine and think about what could have possibly been happening, And so I think the one I love is when it says maybe Ruth had begun understanding God differently because of her connection to Naomi. And I think I know for me, there's been times where it's like when you start to, like, as I've started to have shifts in my faith in different ways, and maybe my eyes have been open to aspects of God that I wasn't privy to before or didn't see before. And then when there's people that sort of have that same leaning, or they're discovering the same things, I find myself drawn to them, you know, because it's like, ooh, maybe they're seeing something about God that I'm not. And so being in relationship with them helps sort of me on that journey, as I'm discovering new things about who God is. And
what reminds me of that, and again, you just wonder how much of this was at play. And again, this is part of being faithful to the text, is is kind of imagining is dancing with the scripture here. Again, the Jews saw it as your love and devotion and fidelity to the scriptures was how much you were willing to dance with it. And what you were saying when you talked about that reminded me, just the other day, we interviewed an author and a speaker and a podcaster that I am so thrilled for you guys to get to watch. We recorded it the other day. It's for a message coming up in September.
Yeah.
So you guys will have to wait on that. We talked about maybe pulling out a clip that we could throw online, but it was someone who it was when I was really wrestling with my faith and feeling so alone and feeling like, am I crazy? And when I started hearing him talk and reading some of his books, it was like I was hearing my story again.
Yeah.
And when you find someone like that, it's like, you're like, yes, so I wonder if Ruth was having some of these questions and these thoughts and met Naomi and her family and her sons and were like, yes, like these are the questions I've been wrestling with. This is, and felt that connection, so that when she lost her husband, she's like, these are the only people I know that I can relate with on this level.
And I also wonder, maybe, I wonder if Naomi offered Ruth a place to belong and a place that was safe.
Yeah.
I wonder if, they had lost, or Naomi had lost everything. And so even though she was telling these women, like, don't, like, turn back, leave me, I don't have anything to offer you. Clearly there was something about Naomi that Ruth is saying, I want to be with you. Like, you are my family, you are my people, so clearly Ruth had to have felt safe with Naomi and had to have felt this sense, at least I think, because if I put myself in that position, you're not going to want to stay with someone that you don't feel safe with, so she must have been offering her something that made her feel safe and whole. Well,
especially if what's about to happen is not just, hey, can we be roomies? It's not just like roommates. They're about to travel a great distance in this time where
they're they're like in it for the long haul.
And Ruth is going to go to her enemy. She's going to do what Ruth did.
Yeah.
She's going to go to her enemy's land
deal.
Where she has no husband, where she has no father-in-law, where she has no protection. Many times women in that day, the only way they could provide for themselves is through prostitution. Ruth is taking a huge leap of faith
knowing
here.
what this could mean for her life.
So there's absolutely have to be some sort of safety, security,
Right.
I see in the chat someone is so curious about who we interviewed. It's Mike McCarg. So if you know who Ask Science, he has a podcast called Ask Science Mike, sometimes goes by Science Mike. So
it was the most fantastic conversation, and I can't wait. I just can't wait for all of you to get to hear it, because he's fantastic.
Yeah, it was awesome. So you'll have to wait. So come back in September.
I know when you didn't say his name, I'm like, man, you're really.
I wasn't trying to. I just didn't even think. To me, in my brain, it was like that was unimportant. The point of it was, and now no one's heard anything else because they're just wondering who is it. Absolutely. And so I'm curious, what does this look like in times that you've experienced that or we've experienced that? How do you go about creating family? Like, how do you do that? I know there's been times that. Even the YouTube said this, that I've felt this and said this, like, sometimes you just have to ask, like, hey, I need a friend right now. Hey, can we hang out? So what does that look like for you when you've needed family, in a sense, when you've needed relationship like that? How do you go about creating that?
I think
because I think it might be a little over the top to go up to someone and say, don't urge me to leave.
Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will
stay. That's right. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my.
People will be like,
whoa. I wonder if Naomi was like, Ruth, easy, slow your roll a little bit there. A little strong here. Yeah.
For me, honestly, it takes time.
Yeah.
And I think, sort of looking at it, I guess for me, it hasn't, and there have been times where I've looked at people and been like, will you be my friend? I mean, I feel like I'm a kindergartner on the playground, but like legitimately there's been times where I've seen someone and I just really like them as a person, and I've been like, can we hang out? Because I just really like hanging out with you. But I think for the people in my life currently that I look at them and say, they're my people. Like they are ride or die, like my family. That's not actual family, but they're my family. Those relationships I've cultivated over the course of years and years and years. And there are some that I think I see that way that are newer relationships. I think it just is a matter of that sort of heart connection. And for me, the biggest key in that, and as we talked about this, like, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but just that idea of people that allow you to fully be who you are and make you feel safe.
Yeah.
And when I find those people, it's like I just gravitate towards them, you know?
Yeah, I think that's key in determining who can be those people. Yeah. Who can you be your full self? You know, I once heard this line, it's like, your people, you know your people when you can be fully known and fully loved. You know, when they can know every part of you and love you, knowing all of that. And I think that that's important. You know, are there people where you're having to hold back, you know, not be your true self? That's an indication that they may not be your people, you know, but when there's someone that you can, this is who I am, you know, and they're ride or die. They'll love you, and it's not, I love you in spite of this. It's not, gosh, let's not talk about that, but I'll still love you. But where it's like you can be fully known, fully loved. Earlier in the chat, I saw the Wisties talk about for 10 years have lived without genetic family in their lives, and that, that would be so hard. You know, I know another family in our church that he's from Australia, you know, and they've raising kids, and you know their family is just so far away, their genetic family. And so I think it's so important to be able to identify this. And I think too, for me, how I've done that is just, I think over time, a increased proximity, you know, so it might start off just getting coffee, you know, getting lunch, Zoom, I guess. Now, you know, now we live in a little bit of a different world, you know, but
well, and I think it's interesting too, like, and I'm not trying to like call people out, but someone like Jenny, you know, who's, you know, has been 10 years without genetic family in your life. And Jenny, I'm just gonna talk about you for a second, because I think also we can give away what we are missing or what we need. And I think there are some people that, you know, like she said, God provides and shows me how much we are all meant to be brothers and sisters in Christ for real, you know. And Jenny is someone that you do that.
Yeah.
You like welcome people in and say, you know, let's be family, you know, with no prerequisites, no, you know, and I think that is something that is really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love right where this chapter ends, kind of where it goes. I love this because it ends with this kind of little bit of a cliffhanger. So they travel back. Orpah decides to go back. Ruth stays with Naomi. They go into back into Israel, and in verse 22 it says, "So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite." So even in her identity, as she goes into this new place, she's still the enemy. She's still other. But she goes in as her daughter-in-law, still as family. Arriving in Bethlehem, so arriving in the house of bread, but something's different now. It says, as the barley harvest was beginning. So before this, we see, it talks about Naomi going back into her land, and people are kind of shocked that it's Naomi. Naomi has come back. She left with this husband and these two sons, and this young woman, she's coming back now experiencing so much loss. Naomi means pleasing. She comes back and she says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter. So she's like blaming this on God. She's angry. She's burned.
Which I would be too.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of loss.
100%. Yeah. And I think, and how much more does that speak even to Ruth? You know, to say, you know, here's this woman that has lost everything, that is burned out, that's bitter, that's just kind of done.
Talk about being willing to sit with someone in their pain.
Yeah.
No matter what that means for you. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. I know there's been people in my life that, you know, when they've decided, like when we had people want to move down and be a part of this church, that I felt like, you know, we've got nothing here, right? Like and that meant so much when people are willing to walk with you when you feel like you have nothing to offer.
Yep.
That can mean so much for both of you. So here's Naomi. She's bitter. She's angry. Ruth is the other. And they're showing up in the house of bread. And right when they show up, the harvest begins. It's like as if God begins doing something new. And something is about to be harvested. There is something that's about to come of this. Ruth is one of the few women in one of Jesus' genealogies that's tied to Jesus, because of Ruth's faithfulness. It's like the author is using this Moabite woman to say, yeah, and Jesus came out of that, you know. I love what the authors are doing here. They're kind of playing on this idea and leaving it with all this hope that there's a harvest that it's about to begin. So I think for all of us, if you've experienced loss, if you've lost connection, lost belonging, this story is kind of speaking to you that there can be hope, that you can find family, that you can create family if you've lost it. And I love what so many of the comments have mentioned, that that's what the church is supposed to be.
Yes.
Before we started the service, we were talking about that. Benji's over here learning to produce. You can't see him. He's over there someplace.
See him.
But we were talking about that. We were talking about what the church is supposed to be at its best. You know, that it's not about these flashy services and lights and smoke and, you know, it's about family. It's about belonging. It's about relationship and connection. And man, at our best, that's what it's supposed to be. You know,
100%.
so if you're watching and you've lost connection, you've lost your people, you've lost family, you've never had that. That's the church at its best. That's what it does at its best. And maybe we can't gather in a fancy building right now with fancy lights and you know, all of these things, but what we can do is we can be family. We can check in on one another. I read this post on Twitter this week from someone that I typically like, and it made me so mad because it was this post, and it was like, I can't even remember the context of it, but it was basically like, it was something like, if unchurched people aren't showing up at the doors of your church, maybe it's because you're a mediocre church. And
then it gave all the reasons.
Yeah, and then someone's like, what do you mean by a mediocre church? And what I thought at first is, again, because I liked this author, I thought it was going to be like when you're not loving your community, when you're not taking care of. And I was like, no, it was like when your production sucks, or when you're, and again, like, I didn't feel attacked, but I felt like how many pastors out there are killing themselves
right now, trying to.
And someone posted that. Someone's like, our church, we just lost our pastor. We're doing the best we can. And I replied, and I was like, no, this is a really bad take. This ain't it, church. Like, no one's going to remember if your stream was 4K. They'll remember who you took care of, who you loved,
how they made you feel. And and I think that's a Maya Angelou talks about that, about like people aren't going to remember like what you say, but how you make them feel. And that's just so true. You know, especially when it comes to like this idea of creating family, you know, that's what we want to be, and that's what we want to do for each other, you know, sit with each other in our pain, recognize, gosh, when when family members die, or when you lose your belonging with your family, that's so painful. How can we come around one another and create that family, even though it doesn't take the place of it, it doesn't make it go away, it doesn't make that any less painful, but how can we come around one another and truly be family for each other?
I think that ties into what we're going to do now. We're going to take communion, and communion, what we know it as is, you know, it's when we kind of take the bread and we take the juice and we remember what Christ did for us, and all of that's true, but the context in which it came out of, this Passover meal, and something that Jesus did with his disciples, it was this practice of remembering God's protection, remembering God's provision, and I think in a time where there is so much loss. I mean, so much of the beginning of the story ties into where we're at. You know, there's so many people that have lost jobs, lost income, or are afraid for what the future might look like, and
or experiencing conflict with people that they love because they look at things differently. And, you know, it's just, there's so many layers to that right now.
So we're in this time, and in a time that Jesus was experiencing that to the nth degree. He gathered his closest friends. He gathered his family together. He says, anytime you gather, do this in remembrance of me. And now in the midst of all of that, we get to gather with our family and do this in remembrance. So and that, with that in mind, if you would take the bread, remembering that this is Christ's body, that this is the provision for all of us, that allows us to create this family around this. So in remembering that, would you take the bread? And then remembering Christ's sacrifice, that in the midst of violence, in the midst of fighting, Jesus' response was to begin the redemption of all things and to show us what that life looks like, poured out his blood. So with that in mind, would you take the cup?
Communion never gets old for me.
Yeah, and you would think doing it in front of a screen, but it doesn't. Yeah.
There's just something so powerful about remembering, and to me, it's, yes, about the cross for sure and what Jesus did there, but just thinking about it goes so much beyond that, like the way Jesus lived and showed us how to live and how Jesus loved and forgave and included everybody. And it's just really overwhelming for me. I feel like throughout my faith, like there have been times where I've had to lay some things down, and there are some things I've laid down and picked back up and things I haven't, but communion is one of those practices that has just remained so sacred and so beautiful, and I just love it.
Yeah. So I think I just aspirated a little bit of the bread there.
Mango juice? Oh, perhaps that's worse.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for being with us. Thank you for being the church. And I just want to encourage you guys in this season to lean in, to take care of one another, to check in on one another, to be, like Dave said, just a listening ear, a smile, a wave. Let's take care of each other. Let's be family. And if you're in a place right now and you need that, reach out. You've got this group of people that's why they're here. So reach out and just say, hey, I need some family right now. I need my people. And if you think you may have found that here, we would love to be your people.
I was just going to say, we'll be your people.
We volunteer as tribute. we'll be your people. So again, thank you so much.
And this is our last time for the next 7 weeks.
So,
you know.
Kel, do you want to, for those that weren't here last week?
Yeah, we are just in a place personally where we need some time off. It's been, the past couple of years have been really challenging, and we just need some time where we can get some counseling and have some time removed from everything, just to really get healthy ourselves, you know, and then that way we can be at our best for our family. And so we, for the next 7 weeks, we're going to be taken off, but the team has got this. You're going to get to hear from a lot of really incredible people. There's people within our church that are going to
I was just going to say, I'm really excited.
It's just going to be you guys are going to love it. It's going to be really great.
So you'll have people, it'll be similar setup. You'll have some people hosting, then we'll have different speakers coming in.
Some guest speakers.
Some people are going to do it live. Most are going to be pre-recorded. But I'm thrilled for you guys. I'm really excited for some of the people, really all the people you're going to get to hear from. And it's going to be a great time. And then we'll come back in September and kick off the series with the interview with Science Mike. And man, I'm thrilled. So if you don't know who Mike McCarg is, I'd encourage you. He has a book called Finding God in the Waves, and his newest one is You Are a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass. And it's about uncovering why we are both a miracle and a pain in the ass sometimes.
Because we can all be a pain in the ass sometimes, and we know this is true. So.
I'll admit, Kelly can tell you. Yes, I can. So we love you guys. Don't forget, I'm going to pop this up here. In 4 minutes, we have a kids service. So if you've got little ones, gather them around. It'll be right here on Church Online. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, you won't be able to see it there. So make sure to go to icon.online.church. And you can watch that kids service. There'll be kids workers there in the chat as well. So they would love to have you there.
Actually, Amanda said she just moved the e-kids service to 10:45.
Oh.
Okay, so 10:45.
10:45. Thank you so much.
Countdown will start at 10:40. So.
Kel, good catch. She's on the ball.
That's what I do.
So that'll be at 10:45. The countdown's going to go at 10:40, so you'll be able to jump in the chat then and kind of chat with people. So thank you guys so much. Have a great week. We love you. See you later.